Welcome to episode 200 of the Formula One Grid Top podcast. Today we are here to review the 2022 Monaco Grand Prix. My name is Ruby Price, and joining me we have Sophia Richmond from Everything F1.
Hiya.
Hello. Phil and Mathew from the Grip Strip podcast.
Hello.
Nice to have you. And Ray from Everrayday Motorsport.
Hi.
Absolutely love that name, Ray. But first, if you enjoy this podcast, we would love it if you could take 5 to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We'll shout out all of you who do to say thanks. And if you're one of the 69% of people who aren't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. Well, it took an hour to properly start, and at times it seems like it was just race and no control from the FIA. But we had a tight finish in Monaco in mixed conditions where Sergio Perez took a strategic victory ahead of Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen. Before we look at the race itself, Sophia, we need to talk about the delays and the red flag procedure. You know, it started with a 10-minute delay that became a 15-minute delay before we had 2 laps behind the safety car and then a 40-minute red flag period where there was no running from anyone on track. Like, what went wrong at the start of the race? Should we have even had the delay at all?
The amount of sheer confusion throughout the paddock and even within the race directors about what's going on. Even the commentaries were saying, let's bring Massey back for a little bit of experience, as questionable that is. It was just madness because, like, 1 minute you're seeing, oh, it's going to start soon, like they're getting ready and it's all going to go out, and then next minute delayed. And then the rain kept on coming back and forth, and then they were looking at the radar and viewing what's going over the mountains and what's going on the radar, and like it was just so much miscommunication on the whole track between even different teams. Like when we were like talking to Christian Horner, we were talking to others, with Ted mentioning a few times, everyone had a different set of information. And then some of the calls by the race directors, some of them shouldn't have happened. Some of them, like the red flag, should have come out way, like, so much earlier. Shouldn't even have had the interest to start with the tires. It should have gone immediately to wets if they were able to start at the beginning. Madness. And that's, again, like you said, that's not even before actually starting the race, which was mind-boggling. Like, oh, I literally cannot wait to get into this on this podcast for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And Phil, there was even more confusion from the fans when the 2-hour race clock, which is separate, we should add, to the, I think it's a 3-hour time window now, was ticking down when we didn't even have any cars on track. Like, do you know what was going on? And do you think even race control did?
No, they had no bleeping clue, and it looked like they needed to be pumping gas somewhere or doing some other menial job instead of getting the millions of dollars that they make to run Formula One races. I mean, they're supposed to be very experienced in Le Mans, supposedly the one guy, and I don't know, the other dude that went and threw the inconvenient red flag last race or whatever. Like, I mean, I get that Michael Massey sucked at life, but, you know, it's like you're replacing him with 2 guys that can't even work at Subway. I mean, it's really not. This is the pinnacle of motorsports, they say, and this is the biggest stage for Formula One is Monaco. It's the start of a day that for Americans, and as I've done 2 episodes this past week about, there's 3 of the biggest races in the world all take place on the same day. Everybody is watching. I mean, the Indy people are obviously getting ready for their race, which is definitely their biggest race of the year and biggest race in the world, of greatest spectacle in racing, but I don't understand any of that. They could have started that race at 3 o'clock your time and 9 o'clock our time here in the East Coast, and they could have started the race. It would have been chaos, but the reality is then you put it on the teams. They're supposed to be the greatest teams. They have all this money, all these different contraptions and tools and all these weather maps and garbage. Make them make the call. If Alex Albon and Williams decides they somehow or another hit the right strat, they're out in front and he can literally park his car and win his first Grand Prix, or some other driver. But instead, they literally took it out of the hands of the teams, back and forth. I mean, even Bernd Maylander looked, he looked very unhappy. I mean, at least get him a sandwich, get him something to eat, something. Like, he didn't look very happy about the whole process. And you're sitting there, Eric Boulier, I tweeted that out when Pinks went and spoke to Eric Boulier. Yeah, and it's his birthday too. Exactly. Get him a piece of cake. I mean, have one of those fancy. It's a very, I'm pretty sure he's married. He's got kids and all that. But go and have his kids out there, let them hang out, something. Instead you make them sit in the car all day because they don't know what they're doing. I don't know. I mean, Boulier said they should be running right now. You're waiting on a cloud that isn't going to come yet. If it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain. Formula One used to race in the rain until, I don't know, a couple of years ago. It would be pretty bad. I'm not saying that it would have been the safest race, or that it wouldn't have went under a yellow full safety car or something like that. Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty sure it went under a full safety car because you saw what happened to Mick. Unfortunately, again, which is something we'll talk later, but I'm just glad he's okay. But let the race happen. That's basically what it is. And it didn't happen for an hour and 9 minutes. And in the end, it came back down to nonsensical time limits and this and that and red flags anyway. So it's like, whatever.
Yeah, it did hit a point, where the TV director decided, oh, we don't need to know what lap it is. Let's just have the time that's running down. But a very scathing review from Philip there about the FIA. Ray, Phil kind of touched on this a little bit. We've got, I want to say 20 of the best drivers in the world, but we've got 18 and Latifi and Stroll of the best motorsport drivers in the world. And they know how to drive in wet conditions. Obviously, we've got new cars. They haven't. The reason why they decided to delay it was because we hadn't had any wet running at all this weekend. If I look back to, I think it was last year or 2020, we went to Nürburgring and had absolutely no practice running basically on the entire Saturday. And then we had one of the most amazing races of the entire season. Like I say, this is the pinnacle of motorsport. And then they end up having a rolling start behind the safety car. Do you think that was the right decision? Should they have just gone for a standing start, especially with this latter restart that we got as well?
Ruby, personally, I think, yes, they should have definitely gone for the standing start. I mean, standing starts, it's more exciting compared to a rolling start. You have people, if you mess up the start, you're paying for it. There's a penalty. You're going to lose positions. And, those teams that are lower down the field, they have the opportunity to make some opportunistic moves at the start line. And, since this is Monaco, that is most likely, the most amount of overtaking you're going to get, realistically speaking, because of how narrow and how tight the track is. And yeah, I'm not too happy with how race control handled all these things because, like you said, 18 of the world's best drivers, and I think they have the judgment. They know when should I be putting on what kind of tires, and I think the FIA's thoughts of let's just delay the start because we've not had any kind of wet weather running throughout the weekend. I don't think it's really a valid reason because I think if you look a few years back, I think in Singapore 2017, I think, if I'm not wrong, and I remember correctly, the whole weekend was dry all the way until the race. And look at how well that race was. I mean, I remember how I was trying to study for my exams and watch the race at the same time. But it ended up being such a good race. I just abandoned the studying and just watched the race all the way. And as a Ferrari fan, of course, it's a race I don't want to remember, but it's just so memorable because it's that good of a race. So I don't think FI had any kind of valid reasons to delay the start. And these, like you said, these are 18 of the best drivers and 10 of the best teams in the world, supposedly. Why can't we just let them make the choices? And if you make a wrong choice, they pay for it. Because I think even if you tell me because it's Monaco, we had so many races across the years where they're wet races and they were epics. Just think about 1996. Or even earlier, there were many other races, so I don't see any kind of reason to even delay it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're all kind of agreeing here is it should have come down to, have a normal start. If we get, we obviously did get rain about 9 minutes afterwards that would have caused the red flag in the first place. But by that point, let teams make that decision themselves. That's ultimately, I think, what needed to happen. And I'm sure we can talk about this a lot more after the show. So if you're watching this on YouTube live, leave us some comments in the live chat. We'll answer any questions that you've got after the show. Well, we'll try and answer them all, but we might not get to them all. But let's actually start talking about the actual results. So, Sophia, Sergio Perez got his third ever race win. And it's come at Monaco, and it's very much a strategic one. It was won in the pits. But tell me, how did Sergio Perez actually win this race today?
I mean, he is known for his tire management, and that's exactly how it was. Obviously, towards the last couple of laps, or the last couple of minutes, I should say, it was very bunching up to a four-way car battle, but he was able to defend so well. And again, on the mediums, originally Christian Horner was very unsure on if they were going to be able to last towards the end. But again, like his tire management is the best in the entire grid. And it was just amazing. And he is now the most successful. Yeah, he's now surpassed to be the most successful. Wow. Successful Mexican driver, and he's also the first North American driver after Gilles to win as well, which is a cool stat. But he was just so good. Again, pit strategy kind of came into play again, but that's always the case in Monaco, so I'm not really expecting any kind of surprises in that kind of sense. But yeah, the tire management, especially coming back from a poor qualifying, spinning out towards his fast lap at the last minute. Good race. I mean, there's so much that's happened in this race for all the drivers. Like, you could talk about them for like good 20-30 minutes each driver, and even still not scratch the surface. It was just an absolutely amazing race. So trying to remember every little detail is going to be definitely a challenge for this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Philip, let's look at Carlos Sainz. He started P2, he's finished P2. It's his second P2 in Monaco in a row. But, he didn't really... It was his race to lose when Charles Leclerc ended up behind him. And, it was Carlos that came on the radio saying, no, we're going straight from extreme wets to slicks. But do you think it was that decision that cost him a race win today? Or do you think ultimately, the strategy just came down to Red Bull being the better team today?
I think, Ruby, it was Red Bull did the better job across the board, because Ferrari had the advantage initially. They were pulling away. Leclerc had a couple seconds on Sainz. And there was points where I was thinking that they were going to use team orders again on Sergio Perez. And because the gap was kind of getting close, within that 1 second, of course, DRS wasn't activated, but, within that 1 second. And, Max will probably go and squawk about it. So I'm like, okay, that might happen. But then Red Bull played it right. And they did what they had to do. Unfortunately for Carlos Sainz, I think probably may have been a couple laps. He had to stay out as long as he could to maximize going on a slick tire. But the amount of laps and I guess the clear track that both Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen had made the difference, because that's where they were able to overtake and get those spots, which is where they ended up finishing. It's unfortunate for Carlos Sainz. I think we're going to talk about the person who's probably even more unfortunate than that. But for Carlos Sainz, it's been a rough go here recently. So to get a second place finish at Monaco again is a positive in regards to them in the constructors battle. It's not as much in regards to the points, but regular driver points. But for him, getting some good positive momentum, it's a good thing moving into this next stage of the season. I think that win will come. I'm not sure where or when, but I think that win is going to come for Carlos Sainz. I think now that he's been able to at least stabilize and have a solid weekend like he had this weekend, I think he's back to his old smooth operator self.
Yeah, I've missed hearing that at the end of a race, a smooth operation from Carlos Sainz. Ray, current championship leader Max Verstappen, reigning world champion. First time this season that he's finished a race and not finished P1, but was a win ever really on the cards for Max Verstappen today in your eyes?
Personally, I don't really think a win was really on the cards, because let's just face it. I mean, Monaco, no matter how you try to think about it, it's a narrow track. It's difficult to overtake, and because of the rain and all the confusion there, and how they did the rolling start, it was just difficult for Max to really overtake. And even when it came to the pit stops, because there's no DRS, and it's not so easy to do a kind of a switch, even if they had to give the team order to do a switch because of how narrow the track is, and it can go wrong in so many ways. So I really don't think Max was really had any kind of chance, especially see how Sergio was really on the ball with his tires. He was managing the race really, really well. Even though towards the end, he could tell he was going to struggle a bit because of the pressure, but he still kept it clean. And yeah, I just don't really think it just wasn't really Max's day in a sense. But I think he'll bounce back, and yeah, he will probably have another win sooner or later.
Yeah, absolutely. And vitally as well, Sophia, he finished ahead of his championship rival for 2022, Charles Leclerc. Ultimately, it was Ferrari that seemed to have cost Charles Leclerc a win in Monaco. What did it come down to? At least he's finally finished a race in Monaco, but ultimately, what was it that it was the strategy today, wasn't it, that stopped him?
Yeah, I mean, the curse is finally broken. I think it's now kind of moved on to Liam Lawson in F2 now. If anybody didn't watch that, should watch it. I think it went down to that double pit strategy when by the time Charles committed, he got the notification to try to stay out, but it was too late. And I think that's where it all ended up it lost Charles his position. That's probably the key point that made him finish in fourth and not higher up and not on the podium. That one call. And I think it was just miscommunication. I think everyone was just so scrambling because no one was making sense of everything. Like, you had different things coming out so many different times. You had yellow flags that turned green within a minute. Like, it was so much confusion. And I think engineers and strategists were trying to figure out like what's the best call. And at that time, the double pit did work. We saw that with Red Bull. They did the same thing similar afterwards. I think he could have stayed out a little bit longer, but I think it was also Max's pit to begin with the undercut, and then also with Vettel kind of played into that as well with the timings. I think that was the key point. Like, had that pit not happened and he stayed out for another 1 to 2 laps, you could have seen Charles on podium for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And a driver today, Phil, that will be at least happy with where he's finished. He's continued his run of finishing P5 every single race this season. George Russell in the Mercedes, what a race from him today.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to come up, like we were talking about him, Mr. Saturday. Martin named him Mr. Sunday today. He's had a great, pretty strong start to this year, honestly. I mean, yeah, Bahrain, I think, was his one little blip at the start of the year. People were a little worried, but ever since then, I mean, honestly, he's been the better driver at the team, and I'm saying that as a fan of the other guy at the team. The notion that George is showing why they wanted him, they're showing why he's going to be the future. They have not done a good job with this car, but he's used to driving bad cars and he's responded better. And also, I mean, yes, they're making progress, and they're looked to be progress today, even in the race compared to where they were at the start of the weekend, which bodes well, I think. I mean, they still have a huge gap. They still have major deficiencies to the top two cars, and teams or whatever. But I mean, George keeps on in this consistency. I mean, he's running very well and he's maximizing everything, and that's all you can ask for, really. And in turn, it also keeps Mercedes within reason so that they're able to kind of do what they have to do, versus, say, McLaren or whoever they're battling for third in the constructors. So, I mean, it's a great job by George. I mean, one of these days I'll give him a good car to work with, and then it'll be kind of like what the Bahrain 2 when he did what he did in that race. And I think it'll be more like that. And those days are coming for him here probably later in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot staked on a Mercedes win this season, which, will impact the way that I am presenting on a episode of Grid Talk, should it happen or not. But it will be nice to see Mercedes return to the top no matter what happens. But Ray, let's look at Lando Norris. So close at the end to P5, but ultimately just a couple of tenths off George Russell at the end after making that late stop for some fresh tyres, and was absolutely flying, with one more lap, as hard as it is to overtake at Monaco. You definitely wouldn't put it past Lando having a chance past George Russell for P5 at the end, would you?
No, I think, definitely, if it wasn't Monaco, I think we have Lando passing George there. I think, since we're talking about Lando, I think, we should look at how he's developed as a driver. I think he's really learned a lot, adapted a lot since the last season, over his whole time in Formula One. He's actually been learning a lot, growing with the team. And I think like this season, we've seen a much more mature, a much better Lando. He isn't as impulsive as he used to be when he first started out. And, I think definitely he would have made up the time to George. But yeah, I think we have to look at the car performance of the cars at some point or so, because McLaren, we know that McLaren and Mercedes don't exactly have the best kind of car here. So we have to, it's not really a question of, with the driver, because I think both George and Lando are actually pretty close in terms of their ability at this point. It's more about the teams and the car, because I think both teams have, didn't exactly do a really great job with this year's cars. Mercedes had the problem with the aero balance at porpoising, and McLaren I'm not really sure what happened there, but yeah, I think it's definitely a possible thing, just that, the car is the issue for both drivers here.
Yeah, absolutely. Lando Norris did end up with the extra point for fastest lap, which, I'm sure when you're not exactly in the championship race, is just a nice bonus, really. But a driver who was definitely not really gunning for fastest lap for the majority of the second half of the restart, Fernando Alonso, just his entire post red flag strategy was keep Lewis behind. And, he did successfully do that. And then, he just gave us a little burst of speed with about 5 minutes to go. But started P7, finished P7. What do you make of Fernando Alonso's race today?
Literally a defense minister. Like, the train that he had for most of the cars was absolutely amazing. And like you would hear like the comms and like all the drivers getting really annoyed at Fernando because he's going super slow. At one point he was like 45 seconds out of like fast lap, but he was going so slow. And Hamilton was just not having it. He was getting so mad, so pissed off. He was just like, I want to overpass. Had it been for another track, it would have been easily done. But because it was Monaco with the tight roads, not many opportunities to overtake, it was perfect. Like the amount of memes I saw throughout the race of seeing Fernando's face on a train was absolutely hilarious. And like I think Crofty said FAQ, Fernando Alonso Q. Like it was so good. And then he was even pushing for fastest lap a few times, like towards the end, like the last couple minutes. And I think the icing of the cake, if he was to get the fastest lap over Lando Norris, that would have been amazing. He was my driver of the day, hands down. His able to defend and even tire management again. He's another person that's really good with tire management. His strategy was so much better compared to Ocon's. And I think that goes down also to his age, skill, his time in F1, the knowledge of this track as well, because obviously he's raced here more than Ocon and everything as well. But it was just a good race for him. Again, started P7, finished P7, can't fault it, kept his head down, did the right strategies, did the right calls, and helped as well with the teams as well with some of the bunching up the pack. And then obviously with the blue flags coming in when the top four were overpassing, those were good passes as well. And that also kind of helped bunch up the four cars as well towards the last couple minutes, because they were at awkward times, some of them, because of how much of a train Fernando had. I think he had like up to 5 drivers behind him at some point, and then it kind of like dwindled down to maybe 2 or 3, and then Hamilton. So it was just a good race for him. Like I said, he's my driver of the day for this race, which is to say a lot because there was so many good things that happened this race.
Yeah, we had the first we had the trolley train as kindly pointed out by Ray. And now we've got FAQs. I hope we don't see many more of them personally, but that's Monaco, baby. So Philip, Lewis Hamilton, we already touched on him a little bit, but he had pace, but when you're stuck behind a car going deliberately slowly at Monaco, there's not much you can do about that, is there?
Yeah, it's just a byproduct of the entire season, really, for Lewis ever since Bahrain, really. They didn't have. He had pace. I mean, he had the same kind of pace as George did, but he couldn't go anywhere. And then once El Plan ended, and he woke up from whatever slumber he was in, he goes and drives away by 3 seconds, and Lewis is out in his own racing of like whoever, Bottas, Vettel, and Ocon, of course, who ends up, the irony and all that is Alonso does all that garbage and in the end screws his teammate out of points, which is great. I mean, he did try to pass Ocon, and Ocon did turn down on him. I mean, he was already halfway, at least had the front wheels there. So the notion that he couldn't see that is I mean, it is Ocon, so it makes sense. But, the holding up was going to happen. It is. And these cars are wider, longer than they've ever been, heavier than they've ever been. I mean, it's asking a lot to go and overtake at a lot of places, but especially at Monaco. So unfortunate, but I think his weekend, of course, was compromised yesterday in qualifying. And he wasn't happy about that. He wasn't happy on Friday. So at least there's a continuity for Lewis this weekend. He was not happy the whole weekend. He's just going to reset. He's going to go to his mech mansion that he has up the street and be with a bunch of famous people and break out bottles of Cristal or whatever he drinks. And Angela will make sure it's the healthiest Cristal you can find. And since she gets paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, supposedly. And he'll get ready for the next race because that's really all you can do.
Yeah, I think the car should hopefully be performing better in Azerbaijan, but we'll wait and see. Ray, Valtteri Bottas inherited P9 after Ocon's 5-second time penalty at the end of the race. It was kind of a quiet one from Valtteri. Obviously, there wasn't really much going on for the latter half of the race, but did you notice anything in particular about Valtteri's race?
I think what I would just say here is, smooth operator. There's so many things, it could just go wrong here, but it's just Monaco. You could just mess up anytime, but I think Valtteri just drove his race, drove a calm one, clean one, and yeah, I think he just did a solid job. And then I think he's actually the right guy that Alfa Romeo hired, because I think we saw his performances early in the season. Those were really good. He just showed a driver, who last year many thought, is it over him? Because we said last year it wasn't a great season for Bottas by any metric. We saw what happened in his wet weather struggles. We all remember Imola, and then there's also Monaco last year where he had our world's longest pit stop. Yeah, it was, and the Bottas we're seeing this year is an entirely new driver, and I think I'm happy for him, and I'm also happy for Alfa Romeo because the team finally has a driver that can build themselves around long term. Ever since they had Kimi Räikkönen, but Kimi was already at the end of his career. We had Antonio Giovinazzi, but let's just face it, Giovinazzi just wasn't performing as he should be. And of course, they had Leclerc, who was great with the team for that 1 year, but sadly, he just wasn't able to stay with them because of just how good he was. So I think both team and driver, I think they have a great relationship moving forward. And I think, this team and this combination is going to want to watch in the future, because I think, Alfa Romeo now have some actual ambitions, beyond just staying at the end of the grid. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they can progress across the season and definitely into next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Valtteri Bottas is very much coming back into his own now that he's, leading Alfa Romeo and putting in the performances and getting some decent results, would you have thought that Alfa Romeo would have, finished in the points based on last year's car? No, absolutely not. But a car as well that you wouldn't have really expected to be seeing in the points that much, based on the performances at the start of this season, Sophia. Sebastian Vettel ended up inheriting P10 thanks to Ocon. That'll be a nice thing for him.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, his streak is kind of changed a bit. So every race that he's finished in since 2008, he's always finished in top five. It's now going to change to in the points as of today, and that was by a close call by with Ocon getting the 5 second time penalty for the incident with Hamilton. But I mean, he kind of kept his head down, like wasn't shown much about the race. His teammate, however, that's another different story. He was all over the place as we saw. But it was just a clean race for him, and that's exactly what Aston Martin need. Obviously, with the controversy of the Red Bull and everything that happened in Barcelona, and now coming into it here, obviously Barcelona wasn't their best race as well, so that kind of they needed a good enough race for at least one of the drivers. Obviously, they would like both, but we all know it's Stroll. If he can get past P15, that's a win in Aston Martin's mind, I think. Controversy, I know. Come at me. I don't really care. But with Vettel again, and that also goes back as well with his experience. He's been on the wets in Monaco as well compared to some of the other drivers. Some of these drivers have never been in an F1 car in Monaco, let alone ridden on the wets in Monaco as well. And especially with the new regs, wider, longer cars. I think, again, like Alonso, it's his experience, skills, and knowledge of the track that helped him. Again, he got into the points by technicality, by the 5 second penalty from Ocon, but he still produced a good race. He had barely any mishaps. I don't think he ever got close to a wall in any of the turns and corners and such. It was just a good, clean race for him.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Aston Martin will be wanting from, the four-time world champion. Phil, Pierre Gasly, P11 in the AlphaTauri. Obviously not Pierre's greatest weekend ever. He was, outperformed by his teammate in qualifying, but certainly not in the race. So just a bit of a quiet one for Pierre today.
Yeah, Ruby, his weekend was compromised worse than anybody's. I think yesterday, due to the red flags and whatever AlphaTauri's logic and I mean, that we talk about red flags that didn't have to happen. They called a red flag in Q1 for Yuki Tsunoda, who crashed and brought the car back in rolling. No need to. That would have gotten Gasly in. Whatever. I think Gasly had a good lap. Forget who else was affected in the end because of that. But Gasly had top 5 pace through every practice, and he looked pretty pacey once he was able to switch his tire strategy. And I think it was it's lost points. You just gave away points there by AlphaTauri. By just by just swapping those guys around. Yuki would have done what he did today, more than likely anyway, and you would have gotten points out of Gasly and likely could have even finished in that battle with George Russell and Lando Norris. If not, maybe even further. Who knows? Maybe get real crazy with it. But they could have dictated strategy. They were trying to dictate strategy from where they were, and it would have been an even more interesting race, honestly, if Pierre Gasly had been up front, but unfortunately compromised by qualifying and the decision that his team made after the red flag. And it's unfortunate because he did a good job today and was one of the more entertaining pieces of the race for sure, outside of all the circus sideshow antics that went on elsewhere.
Yeah, some absolutely fantastic overtakes by Pierre Gasly today. For the first half of the race, he was probably my driver of the race so far. Seeing overtakes in places you tend not to see in Monaco, but that's the beauty of mixed conditions. These new opportunities present themselves. And, Pierre Gasly last year showed that he knows his way around Monaco and can perform at Monaco. Just like you say, yesterday didn't get the opportunity to put himself in the position to do so. But Ray, let's look at Esteban Ocon. Obviously got that 5-second penalty. What's your views? Was that a 5-second penalty for Ocon? Was it a bit harsh? Was it I don't think anyone would describe it as lenient, apart from maybe Lewis Hamilton, who obviously got front wing damage from it. But Esteban Ocon, right decision, yes or no?
Personally, I'm a bit mixed about this because both drivers were actually going wheel to wheel. They were Ocon was trying to defend for Hamilton for some time, and it was quite a robust defense. To be really honest about it. But yeah, I'm not really sure if it is worthy of a penalty or not, because part of me seems to lean towards a more of a racing incident, since we are talking about Monaco. This is a very tight track, and there's bound to be contact when it comes to wheel, and sometimes, unfortunately, because it is wheel to wheel racing, someone just loses it out. And in this case, it was Lewis. He lost his damage from wing. So I think FIA, we have to kind of draw a line in the sense that what defines a racing incident and what what is like, deserve a penalty. Because at the end of the day, I think what the fans and what all the drivers want is to have, wheel-to-wheel racing. And that's what we've been given, with the new 2022 cars, because you can follow more easily. And yeah, I'm more concerned that, if we keep clamping down on every incident, we have the situation where the drivers just decide, they should try to avoid all contact, and end up, we just get a procession, which I think nobody wants. So I'm a bit mixed about this, although I'm actually leaning more towards a racing incident rather than, something worthy of a penalty per se.
Calling for consistency from the FIA, the only person that's got less consistency than them is Daniel Ricciardo, who finished P13 today, Sophia. It was kind of always going to happen after an unfortunate incident in, I think it was FP3 or maybe qualifying, one of the two. Yeah, it would have been FP3 because he obviously got into Q2 for qualifying. But yeah, it was just an unfortunate and completely off the pace weekend for Daniel Ricciardo, wasn't it?
Oh, I'm getting all the drivers this podcast. I love it. I think this is potentially one of the nails in Daniel Ricciardo's coffin. I said it last week on talking to Everything F1 and on previous podcasts with the Grid Talk. It's not been a good race, and it's been like this since the beginning, really, for him. Obviously, like, Australia had some kind of like, is this McLaren finally back? Like, obviously Lando did well as well. Like, it's finally coming back, and then Lando's just progressed so much higher, and then Daniel's just kind of fallen back down. And I think, like I said, I feel like it's just like towards the end. Obviously, there's rumors about a driver swap, and it's looking like it could be Ricciardo if that is to happen. Some of the key things as well. Obviously, FP3 had the crash. First, the engineer said, "Is the car okay?" Didn't mention about himself. He said, "I'm okay." He even had it in qualifying in Sharpie on his helmet, FEA, which meant like F them all. Like, his interviews as well, it's just like he's kind of given up. Like, there's no spark, there's no kind of energy. Zach Brown's mentioned about potentially breaking contracts, like that is possible if it goes down to that way. And it just doesn't seem, it's towards the end, and especially with how Monaco was as well, this whole weekend for him was not good. Even in free practices as well, regardless of the crash, he wasn't doing that well. Lando was way above him, and especially because he's still battling tonsillitis. Even Barcelona, when he was like full blown on tonsillitis, was still outperforming Daniel Ricciardo. It is the end, I think. And coming from a McLaren fan as a team in general, it is need to be done, because how many more races can they go without scoring points for both of the drivers? They want to be top 4 in constructors, and at the moment, Daniel Ricciardo is pulling them down, and I think they need new people in, new blood, new energy, because I think it's just kind of getting away from it now. And as heartbreaking as it is, he's won Monaco, like he's had pole positions, like this is one of his favorite tracks. I think it is, like, it's one of the iconic ones when he was at Red Bull, but I think since he left Red Bull, it's just gone downhill. And this weekend in McLaren kind of proved it, that this could be the end of Daniel Ricciardo's F1 career at the moment.
Yeah, he has been sort of there or thereabouts for the majority of the season so far, but obviously there have been a couple of blips, and Monaco was very much a big blip for Daniel Ricciardo, and we'll be wanting to see him, up at the front of the grid smiling as we've known him, but since leaving Red Bull, he's not been at the same level. Since leaving Renault, he's certainly not been at the same level, despite the win in Monza last season, which, ultimately did come down to what happened which did come down to ultimately what happened in front of him. But yeah, a driver as well who's not really performing. Well, he's kind of performing where we expect him to, Phil. It's Lance Stroll, P14 today. Did anything of note happen to Lance Stroll? I don't even remember. I've got anything in my notes.
I think him and his Canadian buddy Latifi were getting in a little argy-bargy before the race even started, crashing into stuff and doing things and taking pit stops. And so, yeah, he got himself a little bit of airtime, and there was errors on the screen saying that he might have been on intermediates instead of full wets. So there was a little bit of time to spend on that, and then that was it, because it's Lance Stroll. So, I mean, I guess that's the end of that one. Sophia's getting a lot of the good ones, and then I get Lance Stroll. I'll add, since I don't have anything else to say about him because it wouldn't be nice anyways. I'll add that Pato O'Ward, who was leading the race just now in the Indianapolis 500 during pit stop sequence, has been signed by McLaren Racing for the next 3 years. And I would assume that one of the clauses in said contract, they said, he's going to be a test driver for McLaren. Well, I also would venture to say that one of those clauses is, if there's a Formula One opportunity, we're going to move you there, because they're going to be signing Alexander Rossi here in the next few weeks as well for their IndyCar program. So, in an expanded IndyCar program. So I would assume that they're trying to hedge on the possibility of Pato O'Ward possibly getting that call up. So we will see. It's unfortunate. And Daniel Ricciardo, though, has probably got plenty of options here in the United States if it goes bad, which it is. So we'll see with that.
Yeah. Right. The first of the lap runners then, Nicholas Latifi, crashed on the formation lap, managed to get going again, but ultimately a disappointing race where he finished ahead of his teammate who DNF'd. Story of the season.
Well, it is Nicholas Latifi after all, so I'm not too sure what we really were expecting at the end of the day. And maybe if he just parked the car there and then, maybe he would save Williams some cost in terms of fuel. It helped them in the development. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's another typical Latifi weekend. Nothing much to really expect. He, as usual, I'm not sure. Let me just check qualifying again. I can't remember who qualified where. But I'm not going to be surprised if, Latifi was once again out-qualified by Alex Albon. And, yeah, it's just take a look.
I'm fairly certain it was 19th.
He was 19th, so who was 20th? Unfortunately, there's no more. We don't have Mazepin here to help him, stay away from P20. Oh, it was Joe who was last. Yeah, he was out qualified, and he was outraced again by Albon in the sense because Albon was just performing so much better until he had a mechanical failure. Because if you remember, Albon was actually setting the fastest lap for a period of time, I think, in the early stages of the restart. But yeah, anyway, I don't think Latifi will be staying beyond the end of the season because Williams don't need a paid driver anymore. They don't need his money. And I think it'll be interesting to see who will be taking that second seat next to Albon here, because I don't think, Williams is any driver at the moment in its academy that is ready to make a step up to Formula One for next year. So it'll be quite interesting to see who will be the second seat.
Yeah, I would wager that Williams might want to try and get in someone with a bit more experience, just the same way Alfa Romeo brought in Valtteri Bottas and it shot them up the grid. Bring someone in, from one of the higher up teams and hopefully get someone with that kind of experience as well. Sophia, we saw a fabulous save from Zhou Guanyu when he was trying to overtake Nicholas Latifi, but ultimately, he started last. He's finished second last of the runners, ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, who almost kept it on the track for a lap or two. Was there anything else from Zhou Guanyu apart from the save that actually took your notice?
That save, that was just like because Perez as well had a save. I think it was Perez or Sainz. One of them had a save as well, very similar to that. And coming from a rookie as well, again, never raced on an F1, in an F1 car in Monaco, in a new regulations, in a new car on a wet. Like he's proven himself as well. There was a lot of controversy when he was coming in about obviously he paid for a seat. That was a given. Kind of pushed out Antonio Giovinazzi, but like he's proven himself compared to other paid driver spots and rookie driver spots as well. He's consistently has been doing quite well. He's had a rough couple 3 races, like 2 DNFs due to engine faults in Barcelona and Miami, and now this as well. It's still good, like, but that save I think was probably the highlight of the race for him. I mean, he jokes like that he needed new suits after that because how did he not go into the wall? That was kind of holding your breath. Like obviously I didn't see it on Sky Sports. It was kind of a replay clip of that at the time, but watching it back, that's something that you would see like the most experienced drivers. That move that he did saved the car as well, especially with the cost cap coming into play as well. They need to save every money that they can to probably look for upgrades and try to get Guan Yu Zhou to be a lot higher up to Bottas, because it's been a few times that he's been kind of close to Bottas and then he's had faults not through his own that makes him drop down. But he's doing quite well for a new rookie driver into F1 with the new regs and everything, because everyone's still trying to figure out the new regs as well. So doing quite well. But yeah, that save, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was Carlos Sainz that pulled off the other fabulous save in the race. Yeah, you've got to give it to Joe. He gave it a go to try and get past Latifi, and it was one of those do or die moments, and ultimately managed to save it. So yeah, Phil, on to another Yuki Tsunoda. The amount of times he went off at Sandoval, you'd think that was where he thought the racing line was.
Well, I mean, he crashed in qualifying. They threw a red flag, as we mentioned earlier, and it screwed his teammate over. And then today wasn't much better for him. They ended up pitting him, and I guess they thought that he could do something on soft tires, and he didn't, and he finished plumb last. At that point, you probably should just call him in and park the car. He didn't have a great day today. There's been moments here this year for Yuki where he's shown progression, but then it comes right back to earth. And that inconsistency is something that, I mean, when it comes to Red Bull and their driver development program, we need another episode just to talk about how they deal with their drivers. But in Yuki's case, he should be glad there really isn't anybody theoretically ready in the next level, because of the connection with Honda as well, because it's not really that great. You think about what Sophia was talking about with Joe. Yes, financials notwithstanding, he is actually not doing all that bad. He is ahead. Mick Schumacher hasn't scored a point yet in his career. You have Latifi, who hasn't scored a point this year, and he's been in Formula One for 3 or 4 years. And Alexander Albon has scored points in that car. So at the end of the day, it's like you need that consistency. It was a horrible weekend for AlphaTauri. Absolutely screwed it from the jump on Saturday. They just absolutely messed things up. That one decision they made is literally drove their whole entire weekend into the ground, because Gasly was looking at a top 5 finish today, possibly top 6 top 6 certainty, maybe. Definitely would have been ahead of Fernando Alonso's Renault Clio and Lewis's broken down Mercedes.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. There was not much really to say about Alex Albon other than, he was absolutely flying at one point in the earlier stages of the race, retired with mechanical issues. Where would you have seen Alex finishing, if he hadn't retired?
If Alex didn't retire, honestly, I wouldn't have seen him. I wouldn't think he had gone up more higher than maybe 1 or 2 positions, realistically. I can't remember where he was when he retired because let's just say Resurrection today was, in the terms of the camera work, was not good at all. So there's some things that I've made that I can't really, think offhand. But I think, yeah, the best case scenario was maybe 1 or 2 positions ahead, because that Williams, it's not really been a really great car per se. And I think Alex, has been really driving. Probably, I would say he's been driving the wheels off that car at this point, just like how Russell did over the past, I think, 2018, 19, 20, yeah. So 19, yeah, the 3 years that he was at Williams. So I think the best case really was just +1 or +2 positions. And there's nothing he can really do unless Williams can make its not so good car suddenly become something like a Mercedes, which is not possible, of course.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Williams have certainly been doing since the turbo hybrid era started was relying on that Mercedes power unit, and then everything post 2017 just sort of seemed to indicate that they just didn't have the car itself to perform. Sophia, Mick Schumacher had a very hefty collision with the barrier in what was a very strange circumstance as well. Obviously, like, the car ended up in 2 pieces with the entire just gearbox rear end separated from the car. Like, obviously it's good that he seems to be okay after that, but it's another situation where Mick Schumacher is either DNF'd or just not finished in the points at all.
Heartbreaking seeing it pan out to that crash, and you just see it split in 2. First thought, Grosjean, like, it was scary to see. And then luckily right after we had the radio saying that he was fine and such, and had the clips. My one thing that I have to say about this entire race as well, the feed onto the TV was very confusing and very difficult to follow along throughout the race. The fact that you kept on seeing like yellow flags, nothing being mentioned, even the comms box got strolled a few times when they were talking about things, and the feed got cut out or just never shown. But with the split, I think that's also proving that the new regulations following after Grosjean's accident, because if they have an impact like that, it should split in order for the safety of the driver. So we can finally see some rules and regulations that the FIA has finally put in actually doing the work for it. Obviously, probably the last one I can think of off the top of my head is the Halo introduction. So that was good. Feel sorry for whoever's going to be paying for that damage. That's going to be close, I would say 2 to 3 million starting, without even like going into the details about what's finished. And with Haas not introducing any new parts until at least Silverstone, we might see next race in Baku some new ones coming in a little bit early because of the damage that's been happening. But Mick, overall, he did a good race up until that crash, and even that crash it was a weird one. I think he just got too close to a wet line, and I think he just kind of slid out. He couldn't pull the save like Carlos, he couldn't pull the save like Zhou Guanyu, and it just slid out. And that could be, again, I keep on bringing this up, about experience and time on the wets in Monaco and such, but that's been such a crucial thing this race. Those who have experience shows for sure, and even like quick wit as well in some cases. But yeah, heartbreaking for Mick. I mean, I didn't think he was going to get points though in this race. He was close to potentially, but I didn't think he was going to get points, and I'm still waiting for that. Everyone's been rooting for him. He's one of the drivers that I think could be on watch. Obviously, he has the name to live up to because of his dad and such, but he hasn't proven as much compared to Yuki, compared to Zhou Guanyu. Like, he hasn't made any points, whereas both of them have had points. And I think with Kevin Magnussen coming in as well, that's going to help. But it's still, he kind of needs to step up now, because as much as we don't want to lose him, it could be possible if he's proving to be costly and proving not to pull out the performances that they're expecting. Obviously, he has a lot more pressure on him for sure, but he did well in F2 and F3. Like, he has proven himself to be good. We're just not seeing it in F1, and it should come hopefully soon. Might see in Baku another street track. Hopefully it doesn't rain. I don't think it will, but you never know. Like we saw this weekend. But yeah, I'm glad that he's okay. That's the biggest thing, that he was able to come out okay right after Kevin Magnussen like finished, which was bad timing for Haas as well. Like, oh, heartbreaking, literally heartbreaking.
Yeah, very heartbreaking. And another big crash from Mick Schumacher, again totaling a Haas, which for a team with a very, very small budget is not what they need at the minute. And, you know, we've just obviously touched on this, Phil. Kevin Magnussen DNF'd with a water pressure issue, I think it was, just before Mick Schumacher's DNF as well. Ultimately, just not a very good weekend for the Haas team.
Yeah, that's kind of the ebbs and flows for the team right now, Ruby. They have had great moments early in the season, but then there's been races where they have not been in the mix. And this was definitely not one of those. And, you know, piggybacking off of what Sophia was saying in regards to Mick with these crashes at these street courses, it's becoming a trend now, and an unfortunate trend. And then on the flip side, you have Kevin Magnussen, who the new lease on life that he's had being back in Formula One with Haas, and the good camaraderie and the good team deal they have going on right now. But the money, I mean, Gene Haas is a multimillionaire, but you're capped at a certain amount of money, and you're going to be taking penalties left and right here once we get past the summer break, probably. For Mick Schumacher, so that chase for a point is going to be tough. And for Kevin Magnussen, hopefully the upgrades they bring here in a month's time will be good, but they're going to be struggling probably at Baku and also at Montreal without getting upgrades relative to you know, the likes of Alfa Romeo and some of the other teams that they are battling with at the moment in the standings. I mean, they're only 2 points behind AlphaTauri. Alfa Romeo is actually in their own battle with Alpine. So Haas and AlphaTauri. So they're going to be giving up ground to them. The possibility of Aston Martin responding, it could become a problem for them. So all of a sudden, that good start to the year that they had might kind of go by the wayside. If they're not able to maximize things here in the next few races, but we'll see what happens with that. Unfortunate, another engine issue, but at least they didn't, grenade it, and they'll be able to repair it, kind of deal. So at least they won't be in a position where it could be a bigger problem there.
And it could be worse. There could be a Russian driving for that team and also owning it, So we're glad about that for 2022's Haas, as unfortunate it is for Ukraine. So let's start actually looking at our stars of the race. We've already had one very much mentioned from Sophia, but Ray, your driver of the day, please.
I'm having a very difficult thought about this one because a part of me wants to say Fernando. The other part of me tells me I want to choose Checo, but I don't know. I don't these two to Checo because I think it's a really good race. He had a strategy, he took advantage of it, drove cleanly, and I think it's a really good comeback. After what happened last week in Barcelona, because I think I cannot imagine how much it hurt. You raced so hard to get a win, and to be told by a team, okay, let the other driver pass. Especially so early in the season, where I don't think it's a necessary thing for team orders. But then on the other hand, Fernando driving the world's widest F1 car, like as if he was driving, his car was the width of the circuit. So I'm a bit conflicted about that. It's either of these two, for me.
Yeah, we've had Giga Kubica, now we've got Giga Nando. Sophia, are you actually going to stick with Giga Nando as your driver of the day?
Yeah. I'm gonna stick with him. There's a few honorable mentions, and I've kind of touched about it because I've had the best drivers today on this podcast. A lot of them have been my picks for driver of the day. But no, I'm gonna stick with Fernando. He's showing his skill. He's showing, as controversial as it is, he deserves a seat currently might be a play for next year if they want to keep him on because of how well he's been doing for the team. Not so much for him in regards to points, but for the team itself in constructors. Yeah, he's my driver of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice to see him go a bit quicker whilst keeping Lewis behind, but you got to run your own race. Phil, your driver of the day, please.
I think it's a tie between Pierre Gasly and George Russell. Pierre Gasly because he actually provided entertainment today, because his team did such a terrible job yesterday. And then George Russell, even though we didn't get to see him maximizing a top 5 finish and continuing the streak to start this season, being able to give a little bit positive momentum for Mercedes as they move to these next 2 races here, which hopefully might bring more upgrades and more opportunities for them. But I kind of think it's a tie there. You'd want to say Checo because of the job he did, but I think it was as much to do with his team and their strategy that dictated that. Outside of that, I'm not really sure who else we could really pick. So those are my guys there.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't the Ferrari strategists that were the star contenders today. I think I'm going to go Pierre Gasly, just like you. He was my star for the first half of the race, and then ultimately there wasn't really much to talk about for the second half post the red flag. So, yeah, I think Pierre Gasly, pulling off overtakes left and right, not quite center because otherwise you'd go through the car in front of you. But yeah, Pierre Gasly for my driver of the day, and we'll look to see what happens in Azerbaijan in 2 weeks' time. But now is obviously the time to give you guys a chance to promote yourselves, because obviously you're not just from Grid Talk, you're from everywhere else. So, Ray, let's start with you. Everrayday Motorsport, give us a little pitch.
So I'm Ray for Everrayday Motorsport, and I used to make videos because I haven't made some videos in some time. Don't worry, there will be content coming soon, I promise. And yeah, I also write on Twitter based on some controversial opinions I have from time to time, which you can find at everready_MSPRT, because Twitter just cannot afford be giving the characters to write motorsport, sadly. And yeah, that's about it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Sophia, you're from Everything F1. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, as mentioned, I'm part of the Everything F1 team. We are on all social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have TikTok now, and it's either under Join EF1 or Everything F1. We have a website, www.everythingf1.com, posting articles, primarily F1, but we are doing content on F2, F3, W Series, Formula E, pretty much anything motorsports. We have a weekly podcast that gets filmed live on a Tuesday night most of the time and released on a Wednesday with amazing special guests. Last week we had Lucas Degrassi on. We've had Callum Eilert, a few big ones coming in down the future as well. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for Everything F1.
Yeah, and Phil, you're from the Grip Strip podcast.
Yep, Grip Strip podcast. Basically, if it goes fast, 2 and 4 wheels, we talk about it on the Grip Strip podcast. Where myself and Josh Fine, who's a great sim racer, we go and talk about all things. We talk about Formula One, IndyCar, NASCAR, motorcycles, et cetera, et cetera. We're on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Spotify, Podbean, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, Verbal, and Josh just set up a new YouTube page for us, so now you get to look at our beautiful faces on YouTube as well if you want to take in your Grip Strip podcast that way. We had some special guests on this past weekend, or this past week, NASCAR related and also IndyCar related, so if you want to go and take in some information and some good information and tidbits, you have it from those guys as well. So thanks as always to the crew here, and thanks Ruby for doing such a great job. Hosting this show is so stressful. You've done it so many times. I don't know how you pull it off, and you do it with such grace. I've done it twice and it hasn't been anywhere near as good. So I appreciate you and the great job that you do too. And great to meet you both, Sophia and Ray.
Oh, thanks, Phil. I always want to see more of your beautiful face as well. But yeah, if people want to find me anywhere, I also do a music podcast, Fresh from the Scene, at FFTSCENE on the socials. And it's also available on all of the usual podcast platforms, which I will be listing at the end of the show anyway. My most recent episode featuring the lead vocalist of pop punk post-hardcore band Trash Boat. Very fun. It's out there now. Go and listen to it. And if you want to follow me on the socials, it's at Rubes, RUUBEZ, or maybe a 001, depending on the platform, because someone beat me to it. The you'd think you'd be safe with a username like that, but anyway, Grid Talk is available on YouTube, where most podcasts are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Music, Verbal, Omni Studio, and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to qualifying and race results. Please consider supporting the channel on Patreon so we can get mics, lights, and better recording equipment. You can get your hands on some official Grid Talk merchandise on f1chronicle.com/store. Also, make sure you subscribe so you're the first to know when each new weekly episode is released. If you're watching the YouTube show live, stick around because we'll be answering some more questions that you've got and maybe talking about some other things that didn't quite get a mention during the show. But for now, we'll be back soon with plenty more F1 content, including the Azerbaijan Grand Preview next weekend. But for now, thank you very much for listening and goodbye. Awesome. So let's have a look at some comments. First of all, one from John Borja, not quite sure. To whom it may concern moment right there. I presume something happened with Valtteri Bottas that wasn't just finishing P9. Or did I miss something?
No, I don't know.
I think he's just outperforming
Yeah.
Hamilton.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's pretty much how it is. He's proving race after race that he made the good call to leave, and is showing by outperforming Hamilton. Not every time, but close to every time.
I think it's as much to do with the fact that he's in his own team and he's back to where he was more comfortable. The pressure and expectations on him are more to what he was prior to being at Mercedes, and he's back to what he was before. Lewis is not doing great, but if there's one person that's probably madder about it than anybody, it's Lewis himself. So the day is going to come. The time's going to come for him too, but Alfa Romeo, Sauber did a good job with that car, and that's why Bottas is able to do what he's able to do. At times this year, missing Q3 actually was weird for him.
I think it was twice in a row now, isn't it? That he's missed it, but that's more because of other things going on around him than actually his own faults
itself. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one we've got, Anton M. Ferrari's chief strategist is a lump of celery. And it was Ferrari's strategy that ultimately cost him this race, wasn't it? Carlos Sainz obviously making the right decision to stay on extreme wets until it went to slicks. But because of the timing of the stops and, the Red Bulls having the pace with the clear track in front of them to just keep going for another lap, Perez managed to overcut Sainz, but Sainz, ahead of Leclerc, and that's the headline.
Lump of celery. That's a new one I've never heard. There's some sayings and statements from some of our legendary racers over time, but lump of celery. That's a good one. Gonna have to use that here. That's what I would say about Mercedes' strategy for Lewis over the last, 8 years at times. Lump of celery.
Strategy for Lewis as well at the end of it.
Oh God, yeah.
The McLaren the reliability of the 2012 McLaren was absolutely a lump of celery.
Yeah.
Although it did obviously go really fast when it did, but
yeah, the Chinese Grand Prix in 2007, lump of celery strategy by Ron Dennis. Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, Ron Dennis is a lump of celery.
He is, yeah. There you go. He's a rich lump of celery, but he definitely needs to add that to his diet at this point in his life. Probably.
I'm thinking.
Go on, Ray.
I'm thinking, just talking about since we started with Ferrari, I think it's really a huge shame, how the team has I feel like it's basically collapsed since 2018 with the death of Sergio Marchionne. It's like, at the moment he died, everything just fell apart. The 2018 title challenge, it just collapsed. 2019, they just got the concept entirely wrong. 2020, and also they got busted for cheating. And then 2020, the car, they added more wing to the 2019 car basically, and they had an absolute garbage power unit. And for this year, they started the year strong, and it's just fallen apart entirely. With like poor strategy as we've seen today, and I think it's just a huge shame because I think they have really. I think it's once again a 2018 situation where they have the best car, but just not taking advantage of it at all because of all this kind of mess up they're making on the race team itself.
Yeah, that's Ferrari to a T since 2012, I would say. Really, they've thrown away so many potential wins or podiums and stuff, and today they just. Charles Leclerc was not a happy driver at the end of it, was he?
Yeah, and I mean, he finished, it's true, but, he wanted to win. He had done everything he needed to do yesterday, which in theory should have been enough. At Monaco, more than any other circuit, that should have been enough. But between
he was quite far ahead as well.
Oh, yeah, he had 4 seconds on Sainz, or 3 or 4 seconds on Sainz. Like it could have been dictated by them, but oh well. Yeah, Callum Ilott just smacked the fence coming off of turn 2. Christian Lundgaard ran through all of his debris too. So, and Alex Palou was missed getting on a pit road by maybe about a second. So now he's going to go to the back of the field. So that'll make it interesting.
Oh no. Yeah, there was just a bit of Jared Bradley in the comments gave us a bit of an update. Just big crash on the Indy 500 77 car on lap 70.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we got a comment from Coops, who's been on the show several times. The FIA seemed like they were not sure who was to make the decisions, then were afraid to make the decision, and that's ultimately what we were saying. They left it too late to make key decisions, and maybe made some key decisions a bit too early without really thinking about ultimately what needed to be done. All that time when we were under the red flag conditions, Bert Mylander could have been out on the track trying to clear some space, break up some puddles and stuff in the grooved safety car, and ultimately that's not what happened. I was thinking this before the race, well, not before the race, before the show. I think the FIA need to introduce a new standardized procedure for what we do during scenarios like this, so that people know what's going on, so that fans can understand that, oh, we've decided to delay the race start. Well, why have you decided to delay the race start? What's the procedure now that you've delayed the race? I didn't know that, they could get the people back out on the pit straight to make changes to the cars. And I host this podcast.
So many different kind of thrown out everywhere. By the way, hi Coops. He's part of Everything F1 as well. So my thing is, well, I understand why safety car wasn't able to go out to do kind of the exploratory laps. The pit lane is so small in Monaco as well. So that could have been a reason why when they did the 10-minute warning, you normally expect before the 10-minute warning, safety car does 1 or 2 laps to see how safe the track is. But because the pit lane was so small and narrow, it wouldn't be possible, I don't think. I mean, I just feel like the car could have gone outside, like not gone through the pit lane to do 2 laps and then let the cars go a little bit further out and then have them come out of the pit lane, if that makes sense, to do kind of the exploratory laps and such. But some of these calls, I mean, one of the reasons why they delayed the second time with the red flag was because, or even the first time, was because there's 2 race directors this time around because of decision to get rid of Michael Massey. They were both at odds with each other. They weren't agreeing on certain rules that are taking place. And that kind of now leads to the question, there's going to be so much controversy now talking about can we bring Michael Massey back? There's been rumors that he might come back at some point, but having two people, if they're going to butt heads and not agree, it's going to ruin the race. And we've just seen that prime example today with them deciding when red flag should go, what's happening, when's race start. It should be one person. Yes, it's a lot of pressure, i.e. Massey with his decisions about the lap cars back in Abu Dhabi, but there needs to be one because it's going to lead so much confusion. Commentary didn't even know what was going on half of the time as well. They were getting the same information as we were. And for fans that are just getting into it now, especially after Drive to Survive, how great Miami was, well, great Miami was, like, there's so many new fans that don't understand every single new rules and regulations, and there's new kind of indents into each rules. Like, for example, the changing of the tires. It's really confusing, and no one has time to read that massive rule book, and it changes almost a couple months as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to say now, I don't want Massey back.
No.
Just there was too much that was going wrong during his period. And, you know, there is obviously going to be the adjustment period that we've got with the two race directors that we cycle through. But today, you know, I think they got it wrong. Personally.
You need to have, like, there's a group of stewards, like a steward team, but then you have a chief steward. The point is the chief steward's supposed to be able to be the final call on everything. And there's also the notion of letting the race go and see how it goes. And it's not as much like, it's like, oh, you react versus premeditated, but it's like, why are you trying to get into that? It's getting into NASCAR the way Formula One is calling and doing some of the things, which is not good. Coming off of a controversial finish last week, just as an example, you need to I don't know, like, just let them race. I mean, the things would have happened, maybe the same stuff would happen, but the fact is, at least let them go at the initial time. I think there was a whole wet-dry mix. They might have gotten about 10 laps into the race, and then the time clock starts. Okay, now we can start explaining certain rules or regulations and this, that, and the other. Maybe somebody bins it, whatever, but the fact of the matter is it could have happened organically. And it didn't seem organic. You know, for an hour and 10 minutes, it just seemed like it was a cluster, and it's unnecessary, really.
And then you've also got, like I mentioned during the show, you know, there's the 3-hour window in which a 2-hour race has to happen. And yet the 2-hour clock is supposed to stop when, you know, we're under red flag conditions and stuff. The clock started ticking down 5 minutes before the cars made it onto the track. When really, like Martin Brundle pointed this out, it should have started when that pit lane light went green, because, you know, they can't be out on the track when, you know, they can't leave the pit lane. But then it carried on going down during the red flag period. That's not what's supposed to happen. We arguably could have had more laps today if, you know, if that clock had been consistent. Otherwise, what's the point in having the 3-hour window if the 2-hour clock's just going to continue ticking down across it? You know?
And even the laps as well, we should have had at least 1 to 2 laps taken down anyway because of being under the safety car as well. They didn't even touch that. I mean, obviously it came down to the time race, but that 5-6 minutes, that's 4 to 5 laps potentially right there if you think of the +1 as well to finish off. We could have been so much closer to 77 laps or 75 as it should have been because of the 2 safety cars before even the start of the race. We could have actually probably finished. We did get the full points, the 25 points and such, because we passed the 75% threshold. But it was just a mind-boggling, like, the laps, the clocks, the flags. Nobody know if the sky was up or down.
Yeah.
Where to go, left or right.
It seemed like Spa all over again in that sense, with how badly everything was run. But even in that sense, there was no chance that they were going to get that race in. And the fact that they got it going, or tried to, or whatever you want to call what happened there, was totally farcical. And it also played a role in the championship too, even with the points as they were. Hopefully, I don't think, even though Checo's only 15 points behind his teammate, I don't think they're going to allow him to compete for the championship. So, but that's part of why you're the second driver at Red Bull, I guess. But the fact is that's interesting in itself. The fact he's only 15 points behind his teammate, and only 9 points, or 6 points behind Charles Leclerc. So that's something. They have a nice solid points lead in the constructors right now, so I think they don't really have to worry about that. But it's just this race could have been done so much better. It could have looked so much better for Formula One when you have so many eyes on you in this spot. And in the end, Checo possibly wins the race that way too, clean whatever straight up. But I don't know. It's just unfortunate, really.
Yeah. What is it? I was gonna say. Yeah, Red Bull have clearly invested way too much in Max Verstappen being the drivers' champion, and to the extent that they are prepared to, sacrifice Sergio Perez in order to do that. But I'm gonna get.
It's the reason why Daniel Ricciardo left.
Absolutely.
He sacrificed his career, but the fact is, it's why Daniel Ricciardo left. He saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah, he absolutely saw that was who they were building the team around, and he had to make a decision, and whether you think that was the right decision or not, I'm not sure Daniel Ricciardo cares so much. But anyway, I'm going to get one last comment from Jared Bradley. Where was the comment? I asked in the comments, was the penalty deserved or harsh for Esteban Ocon? Jared said, Ocon deserved, unlucky, but I think he was at fault. Obviously, I asked you about this on the show, Ray, but is there anything that the rest of you thought about this penalty and stuff?
I made my presence felt, but then that's my own personal bias kicking in a sense. But then also, he could have avoided that if he really wanted to. But he didn't want to, and that's what it is a racing incident, but it's looking in your mirrors and stuff too. It's the same kind of deal as when he won last year, when he won his first Grand Prix at Hungary. He was able to race Sebastian Vettel and look in his mirrors and hold him off and do all that cleanly. He could have handled that cleanly too, and more than likely held Lewis back, honestly, and it would have been dictated strictly on strategy there. But then they called another red flag anyway, so he got to repair his wing, and then he just got held up behind his teammate. So
you can see it both ways. I think if Ocon, because he slowed down on that corner as well, had it not slowing down too much, it would have been fine. Like, he still had a little bit of the lead anyway. He was on his own racing line, and it was fine. I think it was definitely a racing incident, but again, we kind of want to, God forbid, we want the FIA to be kind of regular when it comes to penalties with that instant. But I don't know. I think the 5 might have been a little bit too harsh, but I can see where they're going forward, trying to be consistent. But I think it was more of a racing incident because it wasn't as much damage. Obviously, the red flag kind of helped with the change of the front wing, but it wasn't enough damage. There was space on both sides. Yes, Ocon should have looked in the mirrors. He could have done what Gasly should have done. Gasly didn't do as well in Miami, looked in the mirrors and all that, and Mick as well in Miami with Vettel. Because they didn't even get penalties as well. Gasly had his penalty, but Mick or Vettel didn't have their penalties from that incident. I just think it was a little bit too harsh, but again, that's my opinion on it.
Yeah. Consistency. That's what all we want from the FIA. Just a little bit of consistency.
We can only hope.
Yeah.
We can only hope.
I made a saying back many years ago, being from here and with NASCAR and the way they call. Oh, look at that pass by Connor Daly. Consistently inconsistent and selective enforcement in regards to their rules and penalties and things. And it was very like how they threw caution flags when certain drivers were leading. But then when other drivers were leading, they wouldn't, and they throw phantom yellows and things like that and it's part of why NASCAR is considered more WWE these days. Formula One is unfortunately going down this path. Maybe it's because of Liberty and because they're run by American companies. So they see the goofiness of NASCAR and I think they can do it in Formula One. But you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. I mean, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars in NASCAR, but you're talking about major car manufacturers invested in this. You're talking about guys that are getting paid 10, 20, 30, in Lewis's case, probably like $40 million to be doing this. You can't be messing around like that and really expect for it to not go and affect the overall product eventually. So that's, I think, something that Formula One has to worry about. I mean, albeit if they get more viewers of Drive to Survive, then I guess they don't really care. Or if they can make more fake marinas like Miami, then they won't care or whatever. They read, or I think it was on Racer today, that it sounds like South Africa will be coming back to the calendar, which will be interesting. First time since 1993. But I mean, you'd only have to listen to Trevor Noah to understand what happens and has happened in South Africa. So, I mean, but then we go to Saudi Arabia, so really does, and China. So does it really matter at that point?
Interesting. Yeah. I'm not going to get onto
Yeah, I
that
know.
element
I
myself.
know.
But yeah, on that note, I think is a good time to call the post show. So thanks a lot to everyone that gave in your questions. It's all, we always like to be able to, acknowledge them, and we appreciate any person that actually positively engages with this podcast. So if you're still watching this, thank you very much. Thanks a lot to you three for joining me for this show. It's been fun. And we'll be back, like I say, next weekend to preview the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, which will be fun. But yeah, now, see you later. Aiden.